After 7 painstakingly long years of intense speculation, memes, and growing skepticism about whether it would ever see daylight, the wait is finally over. Hollow Knight Silksong has descended from the realm of vaporware into the hands of players who are already reaching hair-pulling levels of madness in a certain subreddit. A developer team so ambitious, so passionate, so focused on their vision that they went radio silent for nearly a decade just to ensure that what they would put out would slap just as much as the first game. And it's worth noting, this is a game that was initially supposed to be a DLC, but over time it simply grew into something that couldn't be contained to a 3-letter label any longer. Over a lengthy amount of time, trailers that teased several new mechanics were the only snippets of content that fans could hold on to, until one day all of that changed unexpectedly. A Metroidvania built to make tryhard sweat and traumatize newcomers, pushing your reflexes, your patience, and your sense of wonder to their absolute limits. The wait was long, maybe too long, but from the opening moment, it's clear this wasn't wasted time, as Team Cherry set out to make more than just another Hollow Knight. They wanted to go above and beyond with their unmistakable signature move of polishing every detail to mind-boggling levels of perfection, while still making sure the game remained recognizable, with lots and lots of bugs. We play as Hornet, the mysterious needle-wielding character from the first game, who makes a return with her usual red dress, but with many of her powers stripped to give her adversaries a fighting chance. As expected, she doesn't move like the Knight. She darts, springs, and stings with agility that demands absurd levels of hand-eye coordination, as every mistake is punished with a merciless swipe from foes that hit harder than anything in Hollow Nest, resulting in a learning curve that feels a tad too unforgiving at times, but very satisfying nonetheless. From runbacks that will have you question the sanity of who developed certain areas, to early game encounters that put you through hell just to earn yourself a slap on the shoulder, Silksong is a hard-hitting game in all senses of the word. But the fights are only part of what makes the game extra saucy. This time around, we find ourselves in Farloon, the towering kingdom Hornet is brought to in a cage by veiled entities, wherein the climb is what creates a constant sense of forward pressure. Its many maps, coming in a variety of colorful biomes, are a playground of secrets and a nightmare of obstacles, twisting and splintering to paths that taunt you with just out of reach areas, daring you to return once you have sharpened your skills. Speaking of which, the platforming also took a significant upgrade, with multiple demanding sequences paired with the famous Path of Pain, but in several smaller, lightish versions that require an intense amount of focus just to get through in one piece. Over time, even casual exploration becomes a test of grit, rewarding persistence with new tools, shortcuts, hidden paths, and lore information that slowly piece together the shape of this strange world. In that sense, what really keeps you glued to the screen, however, isn't any of that. Rather, it's the intense gameplay, the rhythm of dying several times, learning little by little, then slowly adapting until overcoming the impossible becomes routine as your hands start catching up to your instincts. While there's no denying that the original game became a literal phenomenon at this point, Silksong proved it can match the same spark while carving out its own identity with just as much originality. A fan-favorite game with a historic launch that saw Steam servers scramble due to heavy traffic, arriving with an extremely generous price tag on top of it, and enough hour to forcefully delay other indie games by merely manifesting into the plane of existence. Whether it meets the crushing weight of expectations in full, however, is something that we'll explore in detail, as this introduction is just a surface scratch of what lies ahead. From the very first minute stepping into Silksong, it's more than clear that this isn't just Hollow Knight with a new coat of paint, but a game with several unique quirks that quietly reveal its strangeness without giving you access to the full course, at least not right away. As such, the presentation of Farloon's sprawling, interconnected environment treats you to much more than just reskinned versions of what came before. All of the areas you come across are drenched in atmosphere, carrying a clear theme that translates directly into how you engage with it, and every new section you explore being equally deadly as they are pretty. Whether we're talking about swamps filled with pits of maggots to icy mountains that make you take exposition damage to cold, the developers didn't hold back when it comes to the raw amount of possibilities of how they could torture players for simply trying to get around. The most noticeable difference, apart from a new sprint button in the keybind menu and the side beetle being replaced by a so-called bell beast, is the sheer density of things to discover. Where Hollowness often felt vast and lonely, Farloon feels a lot tighter layered and with a verticality that changes the way you explore almost entirely. Pretty much every other area you visit introduces something completely unique, which keeps the act of progressing upward consistently engaging as the world feels alive and teeming with many hazards that will have you think twice before going for a walk while low on health. Meanwhile, even movement itself underwent some serious transformation, with maps not being clearly tuned to match Hornet's speed, reach, and mobility. Even traversal across areas an unprecedented ability to inflict more pain than ever before. There's a plethora of different hazards ranging from ambushes, traps, and overly aggressive denizens waiting for you to turn the wrong corner, so you always have to watch out for where you're stepping because even the ground itself might not be quite as stable as it looks. In terms of pacing, it has a trademark Metroidvania flair, a slow drip at the start and slowly but surely escalating the intensity as hours pass. Unlike its predecessor, here progression isn't just about finding upgrades that make you stronger or more nimble, but more so about how those few upgrades help you gradually uncover the map, open new traversal tricks, all the while reframing how you approach old obstacles. It's an addictive, albeit slower rhythm that might frustrate players looking for instant gratification, but for anyone who loves a steady sense of growth, Silksong surely won't betray expectations. Even when they're backtracking, the layout of areas make it seem like there's always something vital tucked away somewhere hidden just a little further ahead, whether it's a mask shard, a new ability, or shortcuts that cleverly loop back. Unlock doors that lead to entire sub-regions to side routes that demand specific tools to get through multiple spike-covered walls and buzzsaws everywhere you look. The trail of secrets feels truly endless, being almost overwhelming with the amount of branching paths that constantly test your memorization skills. Taking a step back, you don't need to dive into mechanics yet to notice how much richer the experience is. There's a snappiness to the combat flow that rarely lets you zone out, as even minor skirmishes carry enough resistance to make you respect spacing and timing against common adversaries, and focus on giving your all against tougher enemies. Everywhere you go, there's always a room filled with surprises, be it a gauntlet of enemies, boss fights against powerful foes, or platforming obstacles that demand pinpoint precision to overcome. Not to mention, the immensely expanded bestiary becomes its own form of world building. Pilgrims, bony beasts, twisted insects of all shapes and forms, each feeds into the lore of a kingdom that's long past its former glory and is not so cruel it charges the restless souls that climb its steps the currency of rosaries to have the opportunity to sit down. Like, seriously, just the concept of having to pay to unlock a bench that isn't even permanent is straight up villainous, and whoever came up with that idea is, without a doubt, a masochist in disguise. Aside from that, it's fairly obvious now that not every brushstroke lands as well as intended. For instance, there are moments where the game's enormous density tips into fatigue, with some stretches leaning so heavily into mercilessness that it risks exhausting the player before offering reprieve. In that sense, the scarcity of checkpoints can sometimes turn exploration into tedium as bench placement feels overly sparse, and backtracking after every single loss might occasionally turn into an exercise in patience more so than pure skill. Pair that with the game's environments being a proper challenge to navigate, and dying twice only to lose all of your rosaries due to small mistakes might feel like taking a punch to the guts. These spikes in difficulty are rarely deal breakers, but they underline that Silksong is unapologetically built for players who enjoy its punishing nature while softly discouraging casual gamers from overcoming the multiple barriers it imposes, even if as an unintended result of its finely calibrated mechanics backfiring. Likewise, safe places in Silksong are rarer than beating a boss first try, and outside of a few settlements that provide only brief reprieves from a perilous world that almost never allows for downtime, finding living NPCs who survive without grouping up can be considered a major change of pace. These safe havens are crucial for planning your next move, sucking resources, and recovering, but their scarcity ensures that attention never fully dissipates. Regardless of where you're at or how peaceful it seems, the game constantly nudges players to stay alert, with this design choice reinforcing the kingdom's deeply hostile nature, keeping stakes high and imbuing each small relief as a reward in of itself. All of that being said, for those who are able to enjoy the game no matter what, Silksong is truly a dream come true, but for anyone on the fence, it can feel a little bit uncompromising, and it's no wonder it left such a huge divide of players. Those who have been sold for the hype hovering the refund button, and others ecstatic for finally having a new toy they can play with after mastering every mechanic the first game had to offer. There are some stretches where the punishment to reward ratio feels rather skewed, leaving you wondering if the friction was on purpose or simply an oversight. Surely doesn't happen too often, but when it does, the cracks show up ever so slightly, reminding you that every game, even the meticulously crafted ones such as this, can still stumble sometimes. Taken as a whole, the broad strokes of Silksong paint a game that isn't only immensely captivating but also occasionally uneven at the edges. Still, what offsets the majority of said setbacks is the boldness of its design choices, which establishes a foundation strong enough to carry the weight of a legendary legacy, with its flaws not being anywhere near enough to overshadow the masterpiece the developers put out for the second time in a row. And the difficulty, the biggest point of contention I kept circling around, not being insurmountable aside from a few nitpicks that the devs have already begun working on patches to address. The authenticity behind every nook and cranny, the peak artistry nearly everywhere you look, the melodic soundtrack accompanying it all is just so indescribably awesome that it produces a flow that very few games in the genre can match. A brutally demanding and deeply rewarding adventure where every victory feels earned, every loss stings, an impeccable world design, fluid combat, and haunting atmosphere make the struggle worthwhile for those willing to endure it. If what you have read so far hasn't been explicit enough, then I'll just have to say it outright. Hollow Knight Silksong isn't a game for everyone, much less for complete beginners. Right, some of it is partial exaggeration, but if I were you, I still wouldn't let the coolness of Farloon and its cute-looking characters fool me. This game simply doesn't care about your well-being, as it is more interested in making you suffer than have a good time. Here you find telegraphed attacks with minimal wind-up, fewer iframes after getting hit, an enemy specifically tuned to prey on your muscle memory with punishing blows, and a pinch of input reading. At its center, the combat loop is pretty straightforward. Move faster than your foes, react quickly to avoid damage, and make every swing count. However, despite that apparent simplicity, Hornet's kit isn't quite as straightforward, being built around extreme mobility with quick lunges, dashing cord combos, and systems that tie survivability to your aggression. That means you have to engage with enemies rather than watch them passively, keeping combat dynamic, tense, and rewarding for skilled players who are able to keep up. The roster of enemies is large and varied, with encounters being designed to challenge the full suite of Hornet's tools, and even healing itself becomes integral to combat tempo, with success in skirmishes being tied to rhythm, timing, and patience as opposed to stat inflation. The saving grace here is how satisfying the act of play feels. A staple of tough but fair design, the game raises the skill ceiling while constantly testing adaptability, rewarding players who can steadily achieve mechanical mastery over time. Crisp controls and fluid animation make Hornet's mobility a joy, and the responsiveness is what keeps frustration from arising. Seeing her tumbling and vaulting over obstacles, spinning between combos, and doing circles around enemies is just so awesome and is what grounds the whole experience. The game knows that if it's going to push you this hard, it has to earn your trust with snappy mechanics and responsive inputs, and it does precisely that. This intensity gives combat a heartbeat that carries through the entire adventure, as each fight keeps the tension high, rarely allowing the players to feel fully safe no matter how many power-ups are obtained. The same can be said about other facets of gameplay, like in the case of charms from the first game that have been swapped out for a new tool system split into red, blue, and yellow sockets. In short, these allow you to allocate both passive and active trinkets you find across your journey to specific color-coded slots, meaning there's a new modular layer of complexity to enhancing your character's lethality. The wide variety of tools encourages experimentation with offensive and defensive options, but the socket's restrictions ensure you cannot just mindlessly stack everything to trivialize stealth encounters. Changing topics, a defining change in Silksong is Hornet's use of silk as a resource for her entire kit, including healing. This contrasts with the slow soul regeneration system in the original Hollow Knight, speeding up the combat loop and encouraging more methodical play as players must balance offensive maneuvers with silk management, creating a continuous tension between survival and aggression. It ties together the core mechanics rather well. Your movement, attack, and defensive options all feed from the same resource economy, making every decision feel consequential and maintaining a fluid rhythm that keeps encounters intense and rewarding when exchanging hits. Plus, now you can heal mid-air, which is pretty cool for farming style points, I must say. Another thing that would be super welcome for those unhappy with the default 45-degree pogo are crests, which further augment your loadout by shifting your attack patterns and changing your playstyle, making your build feel a little more curated to your own preferences. There are 7 crests in total, and a quick rundown shows a variety of movesets with distinct attack speed, reach, and damage, among other such quirks and trade-offs, all of which are quite flavorful and generally complete in their implementation, and some can instantly make you feel like you're playing as the knight. However, while the tool and crest systems add a satisfying layer of strategy, one limitation becomes apparent over time. The range of meaningful builds feels narrower than expected, and the lack of in-depth customization was a bit underwhelming, at least from my perspective. Unlike the first game where clever combinations of charms allowed for wildly divergent approaches, ranging from well-oiled offense to unorthodox defensive setups, Silksong's loadout options, while polished, tend to funnel players towards a handful of predetermined configurations. There's room to experiment with minor tweaks, swapping out crests or prioritizing one tool over another, but the freedom to completely redefine your playstyle is somewhat curtailed. The result is a progression system that's clean on paper but feels overly restrained in practice, which may feel like a missed opportunity for those who love bending the charm system into absurd but effective builds. Bear in mind that this is more of a personal nitpick, so I anticipate not everyone will agree with my stance, which I do know is a bit of a hot one, and the criticism might sound invalid depending on your own experience. On an unrelated note, optional content aren't afterthoughts either. The side objectives referred to as wishes are part of a carefully integrated questing system that brings a more tangible format for exploring areas, giving you concrete incentives to take detours to come through areas you might otherwise rush past. It's a system that rewards curiosity, integrating progression seamlessly with the player's evolving understanding of Farloon's dangers. One minor caveat, however, is that they usually lean a bit into the fetch quest formula, but they are handled with just enough variety to avoid feeling like straight-up padding, though some quests in particular may leave some to be desirable both in terms of reward and objective. It's worth noting though that a great deal of content is locked behind a few of these quests, so it's important to watch out for them to ensure you don't miss out on too much, unless you're some sort of speedrunner wannabe. Overall, where Silksong shines is in the way the systems talk to each other, as the game is at its best when its mechanics quietly complement one another, making exploration and combat feel like two halves of the same coin instead of entirely separate obligations. When everything clicks, the game produces small, frequent payoffs that are currency of a great Metroidvania. Those moments are why the design choices that feel harsh in isolation tend to read as purposeful in practice. For a game that sat simmering in the cauldron of anticipation for so many years without ever leaving the spotlight, only to launch on a random Thursday, Hollow Knight Silksong burst through the door making headlines and with a level of confidence that only a pseudo like Team Cherry could pull off. A beloved title turned into a franchise with a sequel that doesn't just succeed in carrying the torch forward, but aims much higher than that, redefining expectations for the series and raising the bar for other developers yet again. Though I have painted a clear picture of what to expect of the game, particularly in terms of difficulty, which can make some people quiver in agony, it's no surprise that a game that's known for being challenging aims to cater to players wanting tight, demanding action, and a progression loop that insists skill matters, possibly to the dismay of many. Where some games dilute difficulty in fear of burning a few bridges, Silksong throws the towel, says fuck it, and proceeds to lean into it as its whole identity. But as it's known, the balance lies in doing all of that without disregarding accessibility completely, which is easier said than done, with the game treading the needle at the extreme edge of what's considered acceptable for a gamer journalist to complete, which might inevitably turn some people away. Overall, there's very little in the way of hand-holding, but those who embrace that philosophy will be overjoyed to see their dedication eventually lead to an equally uncompromising payoff. That's to say, this isn't a game made to appease every taste under the sun. As I said before, it instead doubles down on being exactly what its audience craves: a sprawling, punishing, intricately designed Metroidvania, and in that regard, it delivers with unmatched confidence and consistency. The difficulty curve leans intentionally punishing, which means that trial and error is a core part of the experience, not an oversight or lack of playtesting. Aside from that, the game assumes a level of familiarity not only with Metroidvania conventions, but also with the first Hollow Knight's uncompromising rhythm, which can put newcomers immediately on their back foot. As much as my words might deter some people from enjoying the game, my intention isn't to discourage but rather to caution you to tread carefully. After all, this is a title that demands an equal measure of effort, persistence, and madness, and if you are unwilling to meet it on its terms, you'll likely never see the magic hiding beneath the surface. For those crazy enough and willing to endure, expect an experience that keeps growing richer the deeper you dive into it. A pretty demanding commitment, I know, but trust me, the payoff for holding on rarely disappoints, as long stretches of trial by fire are rewarded with the satisfaction of small breakthroughs, each one stacking to make the whole journey feel incredibly worthwhile. For players committed to diving as deep as their body and mind can resist, the game's length becomes a strength, offering an abundance of challenges and discoveries that justify the time investment. And in terms of playtime, it's worth noting that the journey leans towards the hefty side, so you can expect around 40 to 6 hours to get through all of the main content, or maybe a lot longer if you're a completionist like yours truly. As for the narrative, which I didn't talk much about, mainly due to its secondary relevancy, its delivery remains opaque as usual, with scraps of dialogue, environmental hints, and character encounters weaving the fabric of Farloon's haunting tapestry. The multiple endings, which change depending on your actions, all feel in tune with the usual Souls-like tradition of storytelling by implication, avoiding telling too much while giving enough tidbits to satisfy lore nerds for the next many years. While expansions for the game haven't been announced as of yet, I'm sure the future will hold many more surprises in terms of storytelling and experiences, as there's a sense that Peril still hides many more secrets than what first playthroughs can possibly uncover, with the devs having confirmed they're working on doing precisely that. On a similar note, whether the developers will continue their tradition of free content updates remains to be seen, but one thing is for certain, Silksong is already a complete package, and if they manage to further expand upon it, that would truly be a sight to behold. At the end of the day, Hollow Knight Silksong is a major triumph no matter how critically you want to look at it. It's a game that dares to be difficult, occasionally overindulgent, but ultimately unforgettable for those who give it a taste test. Regardless of your stance on its stumble, Silksong stakes its claim as one of the most daring and distinct experiences of its generation, an achievement worth every ounce of patience it demands, and one that will likely be remembered as a landmark in the genre for years to come. For more reviews like this one, consider subscribing to avoid missing out on new analysis each month, and I swear you will not regret it. Also, liking and sharing the video is very much appreciated, and feel free to leave a comment as well if you want. I always read everything and your feedback so it helps me improve. Anyhow, I really hope to catch you next time. Until then everyone, please take care.